4th of March 1942. The waters off Corfu, eastern Mediterranean, 2 hours past midnight. The sea is black glass, calm enough that the diesels of HMS Torbay seem impossibly loud in the darkness. On the bridge, Lieutenant Commander Anthony Miers stands motionless, binoculars pressed to his eyes, scanning the horizon. His submarine is running on the surface, a calculated risk in waters known to be patrolled by Italian destroyers and German E-boats. The crew has been at action stations for 6 hours. They're exhausted. They're also about to stumble into something extraordinary. At 2:17, the lookout calls contact. Miers swings his binoculars to starboard. Lights, multiple lights, not the scattered pattern of a fishing fleet or the disciplined formation of a naval squadron. This is something else, confused, overlapping, moving slowly south along the Albanian coast. Miers counts 6 vessels, possibly 7. They are close, less than 2,000 meters, close enough that if Torbay dives now, she will lose them in the darkness. Close enough that if Torbay stays surfaced, she might be spotted and destroyed before she can fire a shot. Miers makes a decision that contradicts every principle of submarine warfare he has been taught. He orders full speed ahead. Surface attack. In the dark. Against a convoy he cannot fully identify, in waters he does not know, with no support and no clear escape route. It is reckless. It is brilliant. And in the next 43 minutes, it will result in the destruction of 5 enemy vessels, 3 of them U-boats, and turn an obscure Royal Navy officer into one of the most decorated submariners of the Second World War. This is the story of a night that should not have worked, a gamble that defied logic, and the reason why, by sunrise on March 5th, 1942, the Kriegsmarine would be frantically trying to understand how an entire convoy had been annihilated by a single British submarine. To understand what happened off Corfu, you must first understand the impossible situation facing British submarines in the Mediterranean in early 1942. The theatre was a death trap. Axis air superiority meant that any submarine operating on the surface during daylight was likely to be spotted and bombed. The shallow, crystal-clear waters made submerged operations extraordinarily dangerous. Italian and German destroyers could see the shadow of a submarine from the air at depths that would provide safety in the Atlantic. Escape routes were limited. The Mediterranean is essentially a closed sea, with choke points at Gibraltar and Suez, and Axis-controlled coastlines covering most of the northern shore. By March 1942, the Royal Navy's 10th Submarine Flotilla, based at the besieged island of Malta, had lost 11 boats in 8 months. The survival rate for submarine crews in the Mediterranean was worse than that of Bomber Command aircrew over Germany, a statistic that tells you everything you need to know about the operational environment. Submarines were being hunted with a level of coordination and technological sophistication that had not existed in 1940. German air-to-surface radar was being deployed. Italian destroyers were equipped with improved sonar. The convoy routes along the Albanian and Greek coasts were heavily patrolled. Standard British submarine doctrine called for submerged attacks during daylight, fired from a distance of roughly 1,500 meters, with the submarine then diving deep and evading at slow speed to avoid counter-detection. This doctrine had been developed in peacetime exercises against mock targets that did not shoot back and did not have air support. It worked well enough in the Atlantic. In the Mediterranean, it was proving inadequate. Submerged attacks in shallow water left submarines vulnerable to depth charges that could be dropped with pinpoint accuracy. The slow evasion speed meant that aggressive Italian destroyer commanders could simply saturate an area with explosives and wait for the submarine to surface, damaged and helpless. What was needed was speed, aggression, the ability to attack and escape before the enemy could react. But this required surface action, something submarines were never designed to do against defended targets. A surfaced submarine is unarmoured, slow compared to destroyers, and vulnerable to even light weapons. Attacking on the surface was considered suicidal. No one did it, except Anthony Miers. HMS Torbay was a T-class submarine, one of the most capable boats in the Royal Navy's inventory. She displaced 1,325 tons surfaced, measured 84 metres from bow to stern, and was powered by twin diesel engines producing 2,500 horsepower on the surface and electric motors for submerged operations. She carried 11 torpedo tubes, 6 forward, 2 amidships, and 3 aft, and could sustain a surface speed of 15.5 knots in calm conditions. By the standards of 1942, she was a modern, well-equipped vessel. She was also designed to fight submerged, not surfaced. The key to understanding what Miers achieved lies in understanding what a surface attack actually meant in practical terms. A submarine on the surface at night is nearly invisible. Its low profile and dark hull blend into the horizon in a way that even experienced lookouts struggle to detect. The wake is the giveaway, but in calm water at moderate speed, even the wake can be minimized. What a surfaced submarine gains is speed and maneuverability. Torbay could turn, accelerate, and position herself for shots in a way that was impossible when submerged. She could also reload her torpedo tubes faster, a critical advantage in a prolonged engagement. The torpedoes themselves were Mark 8 21-inch weapons, the same type used by other British submarines. Each weighed 1,693 kilograms, carried a 365 kilogram Torpex warhead, and had a maximum range of approximately 14,000 meters at slow speed or 5,000 meters at high speed. Critically, they could be set to run at shallow depth, less than 2 meters below the surface, making them effective against both merchant ships and the relatively shallow draft Italian escort vessels that often accompanied Axis convoys in coastal waters. Miers had trained his crew relentlessly in rapid-firing drills. Standard Royal Navy procedure called for careful calculation of firing solutions, with each torpedo launch preceded by several minutes of observation and adjustment. Miers had abandoned this. His torpedo crews could load, aim and fire in under 60 seconds. The fire control system was simplified. Ranges were estimated visually, angles calculated by instinct and experience rather than slide rules and plotting tables. It was seat of the pants gunnery translated to torpedo warfare. It was also exactly what the situation demanded. The night of the 4th of March, Torbay was carrying a full load of 16 torpedoes. Miers had positioned his boat off the Albanian coast based on intelligence reports suggesting increased German shipping activity between Corfu and Brindisi. The intelligence was correct. What it had failed to mention was that the convoy would include U-boats, German Type 7 submarines making a transit to new operational areas in the eastern Mediterranean. These were not targets of opportunity. They were priority kills, and Miers had stumbled directly into them. The engagement began at 2:23. Miers closed to 1,200 metres, point-blank range by submarine standards, and fired a spread of 4 torpedoes from the bow tubes, 2 hits. The lead vessel, later identified as an Italian tanker, exploded with sufficient force that the flash was visible from Malta, 160 kilometres away. The second hit struck a German U-boat, U-133, amidships. She sank in under 3 minutes. The surviving crew, those who made it off the boat, reported later that they had no warning. One moment they were on a routine transit. The next, they were in the water watching their submarine disappear. The convoy scattered. This was Miers' advantage. In the confusion and darkness, with one ship burning and another sunk, the escort commanders had no idea where the attack had come from. They assumed mines. Several vessels reversed course, heading back north. This brought them directly across Torbay's position. Miers fired again. 3 torpedoes at a range of 800 metres. All 3 hit. A second U-boat, U-652, took a torpedo in her fuel tanks and caught fire. An Italian destroyer attempting to turn and counterattack was struck in the stern and lost propulsion. A third U-boat, attempting to dive in shallow water, struck bottom and surfaced again damaged, only to be hit by Torbay's final torpedo. She sank with all hands. By 3:06, Torbay had expended 14 torpedoes and sunk or crippled 5 vessels. Miers ordered a crash dive. The escorts had finally located him and were closing at speed. Torbay went deep, rigged for silent running, and crept south at 2 knots, while Italian destroyers dropped depth charges randomly across the area. None came close. By sunrise, Torbay was 40 kilometers away, running submerged toward Malta. Miers and his crew did not yet know what they had accomplished. They would not know until they returned to base 4 days later, and intelligence officers pieced together the results from German radio intercepts and Italian after-action reports. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. It allows us to tell more stories like this. What Miers achieved that night had no parallel in submarine warfare to that point. The German Kriegsmarine had conducted surface attacks, most famously the U-boat aces of the early Atlantic campaign, but these were against undefended or lightly defended merchant convoys. They had never attempted a surface attack against a defended convoy that included other submarines as targets. The concept was considered too risky. German submarine doctrine explicitly forbade surface engagement in confined waters where escape routes were limited. The Americans, observing British operations in the Mediterranean with intense interest, drew immediate conclusions. USS Wahoo, under Commander Dudley Morton, would adopt similar aggressive surface tactics in the Pacific in 1943, with devastating results against Japanese convoys. Morton explicitly credited British Mediterranean operations, and specifically the actions of Miers and Wanklyn, as the inspiration for his tactics. The aggressive, close-range surface engagement that became a hallmark of American submarine operations in the Pacific can be traced directly to that night off Corfu. The Italians, for their part, never solved the problem. Their post-action analysis of the Corfu incident concluded that the convoy had been attacked by multiple submarines operating in coordination, a conclusion that was comforting but entirely wrong. German analysis was more accurate but no more useful. They recognised that a single British submarine had conducted a surface attack, but they could not develop effective countermeasures. The problem was fundamental. If a submarine attacked on the surface at night, at close range, by the time you detected it, it had already fired. The only defence was to avoid areas where British submarines operated. In the confined waters of the Mediterranean, that was impossible. Anthony Miers was awarded the Victoria Cross for the action off Corfu. The citation, unusually detailed for a VC recommendation, noted that he had displayed daring and resolution of the very highest order. The decoration was personally presented by King George VI at Buckingham Palace in July 1942. Miers was 29 years old. He would survive the war, command larger submarines, and retire as a rear admiral. He died in 1985, aged 73, largely forgotten outside specialist naval circles. His obituary in the Times ran to 8 lines. The strategic impact of that single night's action was disproportionate to the forces involved. 3 U-boats destroyed represented roughly 5% of Germany's operational submarine strength in the Mediterranean at that time. The loss forced the Kriegsmarine to reroute subsequent U-boat transits through waters that added 3 days to their deployment time that translated directly into reduced operational effectiveness. Italian convoy operations along the Albanian coast were suspended for 2 weeks while new procedures were developed. The procedures did not work. Further losses followed. The psychological impact may have been more significant than the material losses. German and Italian naval commanders operating in the Eastern Mediterranean were forced to confront the reality that even heavily escorted convoys, even those including submarines, were vulnerable to attack in ways that defied conventional defensive doctrine. This created a climate of extreme caution that slowed the entire Axis logistics network in the theatre. Rommel's supply problems in North Africa, which would contribute decisively to his defeat at El Alamein later in 1942, can be traced in part to this climate of fear. HMS Torbay herself survived the war. She conducted 27 war patrols, sank over 30 vessels, and was eventually paid off in 1945. She was scrapped in 1947. No museum preservation, no memorial. Her remains, such as they were, ended up as razor blades and bicycles. Such was the fate of most wartime submarines. Miers' Victoria Cross is on display at the Royal Navy Submarine Museum in Gosport, Hampshire. It sits in a glass case with 24 others. Most visitors walk past without stopping. Return for a moment to those waters off Corfu. 4 March 1942, just after 3 in the morning. The surface of the sea is littered with debris. 2 vessels are burning. 3 are gone, taking over 200 men with them. The survivors in the water are screaming for rescue. Italian destroyers are dropping depth charges on a target that is no longer there. And somewhere beneath the surface, running silent, running deep, HMS Torbay slips away. What happened that night was not supposed to be possible. Surface attacks against defended convoys were suicidal. Close-range engagements in confined waters were suicidal. Attacking enemy submarines, vessels designed specifically to fight other submarines, was suicidal. Miers did all 3 simultaneously and survived. More than survived, he won. This was not the product of advanced technology or superior equipment. Torbay was a good submarine, but not an exceptional one. Her torpedoes were standard. Her crew, while well trained, were not superhuman. What made the difference was a combination of tactical innovation, calculated risk, and a willingness to abandon doctrine when doctrine had failed. Miers recognized that the rules of submarine warfare that worked in peacetime exercises and Atlantic operations did not work in the Mediterranean. So he wrote new rules. He attacked on the surface. He closed to point-blank range. He fired fast and escaped faster. The Germans never understood what had hit them. Italian naval intelligence reports from March 1942, declassified decades later, show analysts struggling to explain how a convoy with multiple escorts, and including 3 U-boats, had been destroyed by a single attacker. The most common conclusion was that British intelligence had pre-positioned multiple submarines along the convoy route, a coordinated ambush. The truth was simpler and more disturbing. 1 man, 1 submarine, 1 night. Anthony Miers became a legend not because he sank 5 ships. The Mediterranean saw dozens of successful submarine actions. He became a legend because he did it in a way that should not have worked against targets that should have been able to defend themselves. In an engagement that lasted 43 minutes and changed the way submarine warfare was conducted for the rest of the war. Accidental? Perhaps. The convoy appeared where intelligence suggested, but at a time and composition that surprised everyone, including Miers. He took a calculated risk that could easily have ended with Torbay on the bottom and 40 crew members dead. The risk paid off. Sometimes that is what separates legends from footnotes, not superior skill or better planning, but the willingness to act when others would hesitate, and the luck to survive when the gamble pays off. 5 U-boats, 1 night, 1 sailor, legend.